Hello, I'm Terry Reichus, Communications Manager with Community Health Partnership. Today we're going to be talking about healthcare regulations. And joining me today is Henry Lewis, the Quality Manager from Community Health Partnership. So Henry, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here.
Oh, my pleasure.
I'd like to start with you giving us a bit of your background and how it was you came into this field.
Well, to give you the long story short, I was Air Force for 23 years, retired. My last 16 years was spent as a physician recruiter. So when I had gotten out of the Air Force, I was looking for a position, and a lot of the people that I came across, they were still in the healthcare field. And they said, why don't you come on over to the local hospital that we have here, which is now UCH Health. And next thing you know, I'm medical staff coordinator, quality manager, going into compliance. So there was a lot of different avenues that I went through.
So you've run the gamut, sounds like pretty much in this field.
And it's been a wonderful trip.
Great, wonderful. So today we're going to talk a little bit about HIPAA as well as the opioid abuse epidemic that's currently being seen here in the community. So can you give me a little bit of a background about HIPAA, what HIPAA is, and if there's been any major changes to HIPAA since it was first signed into law in, I believe, 1996, correct?
You got it, 1996. So there's been a lot of changes with HIPAA. Probably in the last year, one of the most important things that have come out, I believe it was about February of this year, was the national background check. Really, the nuts and bolts of this whole thing was if you had a mental health type debilitating condition that you can't possess, transport, sell those types of weapons. However, one of the kind of a knee-jerk reaction was from the media. The media portrayed all of these mass shootings, all these. Wow. So this legislation was kind of a knee-jerk reaction where, we're going to stop this and we're going to mandate now if you have this mental type issue, you cannot get weapons, bullets, ammunition, all that kind of stuff. Well, one of the secondary things that nobody took into account for was the VA administration, the VA hospital.
Correct.
So what's actually happening is a lot of these people that are getting out of the military nowadays, they have PTSD, and righteously so. But what's happening is due to this legislation, they're very waringly not telling people about these types of conditions because they're seeing that some of their brethren that got out before them, they're no longer able to purchase weapons, possess weapons, or whatever that case may be.
So they're sharing information in order to kind of skirt around the issue.
They are. So this legislation, it affects a few. It really doesn't affect a lot. So in HIPAA, you've got your business associates and you've got your covered entities. Well, really what this is targeting is the covered entities. And these covered entities are sharing this high level of PHI, protected health information, with these national agencies. So when you go to get a background check, these things become flagged.
Oh, I see. Okay. Interesting.
It is. It's very interesting.
So I assume that HIPAA is just ever evolving, or do you think it's pretty much a stagnant set of laws that we won't see many changes to in the future?
No, it's funny you actually bring that up because it's evolving as health information exchanges go on and all these different agreements come into place as people want to share more of this data.
Sure.
The caution is when you're sharing PHI data, don't arbitrarily be so cavalier. It's not really the wild, wild west. This is if it's your parents' information, would you want to share that with somebody?
Sure.
So you want to be that way. One of the things that we're seeing, though, with this PHI is kind of who's going to be responsible for it. So this past year, HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, they came out where they're going to start holding the business associates more accountable, which it does have some very great benefits to it. But what we're thinking, and as we talk to some of my other colleagues around, we're actually thinking that this is going to become more of a, who can we find harder more? So what this might become is, yeah, we're going to check out the business associates this year, but it's going to become more of a covered entity type basis. So if you have a business associate agreement with, say, a big hospital, people are going to view this as, oh, we have an agreement with somebody with deep pockets. So what better way to get more money? We're going to hold them accountable for your actions. So what kind of legislation, what kind of changes and dynamics in the law are going to come about from this? We're not really sure just yet, but this is still evolving in the community, in the nation right now. There's so much, we don't know what that's going to look like.
Okay, great. So let me ask you this then. What would some of the repercussions be for someone in the health field for breaking a HIPAA rule? What would that look like?
Well, right now, there's a clearly defined set of penalties and fines. If you do this arbitrarily, it'd be, $2,500, $5,000, $100,000.
Wow.
So each penalty that you do, in fact, one of the things that we've actually seen in the local community was people taking selfies.
Right.
Provider type taking a selfie with a patient in the OR, whatever the case may be, and then they post it to social media.
Oh, goodness.
Social media is everywhere. These cell phones are everywhere. So as HIPAA comes into play, it's how do you train people to not do these things?
Right.
So that's one of the things that I think that our leadership is going to do is develop more robust training programs. Hey, these are the things that can happen. Don't do these. Kind of when you're bringing a new person in, kind of like a newcomer's orientation, you're adequately preparing them for this data so that they don't arbitrarily, and not even knowing about it, that they share this with somebody else, and next thing you know, there's a HIPAA breach.
Big consequences, in other words.
Very big, yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, the second thing we want to talk about today is opioid abuse. So can you give us kind of a history of opioids, kind of where they started from, and what has led, do you think, to this current epidemic?
Pretty fascinating topic. Yeah. So in 1898, fascinating statistic was Bayer actually manufactured heroin.
The aspirin company Bayer?
The aspirin company Bayer, okay. Yeah. So in 1898 they did this, but it was a cough syrup for children.
Wow.
Phenomenal. If you think about the dynamics, it'll suppress your cough as it suppresses your entire respiratory system. And I'm not a provider, but just the sheer magnitude of this. So they did this about 1898, and what happened was in 1914, it was a couple years later, our federal government came out with the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act. And what it was there was so many people, because it's highly addictive qualities, they were becoming addicted to it, so they were purchasing more. What a great marketing plan. So they're consuming more of this heroin, so the federal government, they wanted a slice of that action. So they come out with the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act, taxing it and legislating it. So now they're, federal government's monitoring how much is going out, they're bringing in this revenue. And then 10 short years after that, about 1924, they actually realized, hey, this stuff is highly addictive. We really need to stop it. So Congress completely banned the manufacturing, the sale, and the distribution of it on a legal level. Fantastic.
Wow.
And most people would never know that, where,
So at that time, were they seeing addiction coming out of this, out of the cough syrups?
They really didn't classify addiction back then as how we define it now, and on that type of a spectrum. But people, it was solving the coughs, it was solving a lot of issues, but it was bringing that. So then what would happen was they were taking away this heroin source, and then they were going into the black markets, and they were getting into all these other drugs to suppress this desire, this need for it.
Okay.
So the studies, the epidemiological studies, were very new at that time. As we know now, it's highly addictive. Don't take it.
That's a good plan. So explain the phrase pain as the fifth vital sign. So this seems something that is pretty correlated with the doctors prescribing opioids. What did that do to the whole process?
So in 1924, they completely banned the manufacturing of heroin. It was also used as a painkiller. So from 1924 to roughly about 1996, really a lot of pain management was untreated. So if you can kind of compare it to a pendulum swung to the left,
Sure.
we're going to treat your pain with heroin. Swings to the right, now we're not going to treat it. Swinging back to the left in about 1996, so they actually coined the term as the fifth vital sign, as we need to actually do a proper assessment, which in some ways it was really good because they came up with these mechanisms, these tools to assess what kind of pain were people feeling. But it also went too far as the pendulum swings, either you're not going to get any or you're going to have all the drugs in the world. So it swung to the right. Now you're going to have this pain as a fifth vital sign. Now we want to ask you, every time that we see you, we want to ask these questions. Are you feeling any pain? 1 to 10, what would it be?
1 to 10 scale, sure.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's how that came into play. A lot of providers, they don't necessarily agree with it, but it's one of those, there's no ideal mechanism to develop, to really assess how are you feeling in pain. You might feel pain is, you might be able to handle a lot of pain, where me, on the other hand, I might get a paper cut and be screaming bloody murder. It could hurt. Yeah. So each person's, their biometrics and stuff, they're different.
Sure. Well, that's quite fascinating. So do you think that has impacted the amount of prescription opioids by the doctors?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So, of course, I love some statistics. So in about 1991, we were dispensing about 76 million opiates into the community. As of about 2013, that number had just astronomically jumped to about 213, I think it was 213 million prescriptions that are going out there.
Wow.
So realistically, there's so many opiates going into the community, you can give a person an opiate every 4 hours around the clock for 30 days.
Oh my goodness.
And they're covered.
Wow.
So we're definitely, we're ranking amongst there. In fact, I want to say I remember reading a study that they're saying that the United States is #1 in oxycodone, where we're actually accounting for 99% of the consumption of the produced drug.
Wow. So that leads me to ask a question. What is classified as an opioid?
What's classified as an opioid? So an opioid, it's a opium derivative.
Okay.
It's heroin.
Okay.
Realistically, when you break it down, you've got the synthetics and you've got the naturals. And that's how it's compounded together. So that's really, you're looking at your Vicodins, your Percocets, your oxycodones.
Okay. Sure.
A lot of those, Tylenol 3s, the codeine Tylenols and stuff like that. So those are the more common names that go about. Percocet, you go to a dentist's office, they're going to give you a bottle of probably enough for 30 days.
Right, for a toothache.
That's a heck of a tooth pain, isn't it?
Yes. Okay, great. Interesting. So you recently spent some time with some undercover policemen here in our city, the Springs, to talk about this issue. Tell me about that experience and what you found out from being with them.
So it was actually my office partner, Mary Steiner. She sat with this whole group of these undercover police officers, and it was fascinating. And it was, if you could stop all this illegal opioid misuse, because there is good and there is bad, but if you could stop this misuse, what would you guys do? And these guys were coming back with, electronic prescriptions. If the prescription can go from the provider right to the pharmacy, that would cut down on the duplication or the illegal, making of more prescriptions.
Right.
But another thing is the places that are out there, these people that are drug seeking, what they'll do is go to a busy pharmacy. without throwing names out there of really busy, we know who they
The
are
big ones.
because you go there
Right.
and they're slam busy. And what they'll do is they'll just basically not even give a second look at that ID. So you could go in, pose as me, and you would get my opioid prescription.
Wow.
Good for potentially 90 days or whatever the case may be.
Wow.
But the big thing was, and it went back to it, and it resonates, is if we had a system that could just be an electronic prescription, goes right from the pharmacy, right from the provider to the pharmacy, doesn't have to touch my hands.
That's my understanding.
Why would we need that?
Right. My understanding is when you go to the physician and you get a prescription for a controlled substance, you have to hand deliver that.
Correct.
So they're looking at changing that whole process then to cut down on that.
Well, we hope so. I mean, there's so many things going on in the legislature right now. I mean, it's amazing what they're looking at. But there's also some court cases that will potentially look at down the road that might change some of the outcomes. But I mean, it's just fascinating where we have the technology. Why give it to the person? Just send it. Because I can go out onto Amazon and I can get the paper. I could duplicate my own prescriptions.
Wow.
Scary stuff.
That is very scary stuff. So they are looking at legislation then to kind of combat this epidemic.
They are.
Has anything actually been pushed through yet that you know of, or is it still in the planning stages and trying to gather data?
So in about 2013, Governor Hickenlooper, a lot of stuff has been going on and hitting our senior legislatures here in Colorado. And in 2013, he started signing some bills. So some of the bills were it's PDMP, which is the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program. There was another House bill. It was the medication take-back. So we all have medications in our house.
Right.
So what they were doing was legislating that they're going to assign a few more throughout the community that we can drop them off. Because one of the issues that we're seeing is if you're leaving drugs in your cabinet, you're more inclined to take them a year after they've expired, or if you have children.
Yes.
This is a bad thing because one of the latest raves in a lot of the high schools is where you take all the pills, you throw them into a sink, you mix them up, and then you consume them. Not a good thing because the side effects, even those under direction of a physician, they're really not good. And then another bill that really came out was naloxone. So if you're actually witness somebody overdosing, there's not going to be criminal charges pressed against you. Because traditionally, if you see somebody overdosing, chances are you might be partaking of that drug as well. So they want to save the lives. I mean, ultimately, the goal is to save 92,000 Coloradans' lives from taking and misusing opioids.
92,000.
That is the goal. That is the goal, yes.
Okay, great. Fascinating topics here.
Oh, definitely.
Is there anything else that you would like to add that you find important for us to know?
There's tons of stuff that's important, but let's backtrack because we had mentioned a little bit about the electronics. So the PDMP, Prescription Drug Monitoring Program, this past, when they actually submitted the bill, registration for this program was mandatory.
Registration by physicians?
By physicians, pharmacies, dentists, professionals that distribute these types of drugs.
Right.
It's mandatory you register. There's a lot of good in this program. One of the unique things, and I'll get to some of the good things, one of the unique things that really draws an ire is it's not mandated that you use it. You have to register for it.
You have to have access.
You have to have access to it.
Not use it. Well, that's different.
Exactly. But one of the really good things about it is there's been a surge in an increase of usage of it. So a lot of people are registering. A lot of people are gaining access. So what the law did was the PDMP has actually been around for quite some years. I want to say it was actually started in 1995. But what it's really doing now is it's expanded the access. So the physicians can actually have up to 3 more people in addition to themselves as like a delegated person.
Okay.
So what the PDMP does is it actually checks to see if it's a patient or whomever, what prescriptions are they getting? Are they doctor shopping, is so to say? Well, I'm not going to get 90 days from you. I'm going to go to another provider. A real good thing that came out of this is what the prescription drug program actually sends out what's called a push notice. This push notice is really good, really informative for the provider, and it alerts them, your person just got prescriptions at 5 other places or 3 other places.
But it only alerts them if they're going into the database, is that correct?
Correct,
Okay.
correct.
So it really is dependent on the provider checking in
Correct.
the database.
You have to check the database. The push notices, though, they're still coming out, but you can alleviate this. You can actually, if you just check, so if, let's say I go into a doctor, you're the doctor, and you write me a prescription, you could have one of your staff, I believe it's now up to 3 additional people on top of yourself as the provider, where they can check the prescriptions to see, what else are you on?
Oh,
I
sure.
might have told you, I'm not on anything but, a cold medicine. I'm on NyQuil. However, you go into this data bank of information, and next thing you know, it says here that you've got enough prescription opioids to last you, a year and a half.
Right.
And the whole thing is we don't want people to misuse it because they're just unaware, and a lot of it is education. They're unaware of the ultimate outcomes of taking this. The reason you feel good is because it's slowing down the neurons, the impulses that you're feeling in your body.
Right.
Well, those neurons, those feelings, those impulses, they also come from your brain telling you to breathe. So this is one of the bad things. One of the really unique things that we see right now is because of these overdoses, a lot of stuff happens because of legal matters, lawsuits. And we
Okay.
just seen recently there was a physician, an office manager, and 2 pharmacists. They're being charged with second-degree murder because they gave these prescriptions, but they didn't check this PDMP program, the prescription program, to see how many prescriptions had gotten. And if they would have realized that they had received many other prescriptions before. So they didn't do that. Kind of almost I'm just doing my job. I want to get them out of the office because they're pushed for time.
Oh.
But what's happening is these 2 people that they were actually treating died from overdoses. And the parents that are existing from them are actually filing suit against the doctors and charging them with second-degree murder. So we're going to watch this case really closely to see what comes of this, because this might change some of the legislation that comes up down in the roads.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we can potentially look at the electronic prescription. That would alleviate some of it, maybe get away from, actual manual prescription pads.
We have a lot of work.
We do,
Sounds
but it's
like
very challenging.
Great. Well, Henry, thank you so much for joining us today. It was great to have you. Thank you for watching the Healthcare Regulation webinar. We hope that you enjoy the remainder of our series.